The moment the trophy snapped in half, the entire studio went silent. Millions of people were watching. Cameras rolled, lights blazed, and on the center stage of one of the most popular live talk shows in America, 17-year-old Amara Williams stood frozen as the award she had worked her entire life for fell in broken pieces onto the polished floor. The host laughed, not a nervous laugh, not an awkward laugh, a loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the studio. "Well," he said with a shrug, holding the broken pieces in his hands, "I guess it wasn't that strong after all." A few scattered chuckles rippled through the audience. But most people just stared. Because something about the moment felt wrong. Very wrong. Amara Williams had just been named the national winner of the Young Innovators Award, a competition that recognized students who created projects that helped their communities. Her project had stunned the judges. At just 17, she had designed a low-cost portable water filtration device that could provide clean drinking water to small rural communities. The invention had already caught the attention of charities across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. People called her a genius. But anyone who actually knew Amara understood something deeper. She wasn't doing it for fame. She was doing it because of her grandmother. The host of the show, Richard Fallon, was known for his sharp humor and sarcastic personality. Most nights, audiences loved him. But tonight something had shifted. Richard had invited Amara onto the show to present her award live on television. It was supposed to be a proud moment. Instead, it had turned into something no one expected. Earlier that evening, the studio buzzed with excitement. Producers rushed around backstage while guests prepared for their segments. Amara sat quietly in a chair, holding her notebook in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress and white sneakers. Her hair was neatly braided. Across from her, her grandmother smiled proudly. "You nervous?" her grandmother asked. Amara nodded slightly. "A little." Her grandmother squeezed her hand. "You worked hard for this. Just be yourself." Amara looked down at her hands. For years she had worked after school in a tiny corner of their apartment kitchen, experimenting with filters, charcoal, and recycled materials. Sometimes the experiments failed. Sometimes the kitchen flooded. Once the smoke alarm went off 3 times in one afternoon. But her grandmother never complained. She would simply laugh and say, "The world's greatest inventions probably started in messy kitchens." Now here she was, on national television. 5 minutes. A stage manager called. Richard Fallon walked past them backstage. Tall, sharply dressed, perfectly styled silver hair. He barely glanced at Amara. Instead he muttered to a producer beside him. "This is the science kid." The producer nodded. "She's the youngest winner in the award's history." Richard shrugged. "Hope she's interesting." Amara didn't hear the comment. But her grandmother did, and she didn't like the tone. A few minutes later, the show began. The opening music blasted through the studio. The audience cheered as Richard walked onto the stage. "Welcome everyone," he announced with his signature smile. The show started like any other episode. Jokes, celebrity interviews, laughter. Then came the segment. Richard looked at the camera. "Our next guest is apparently a teenage genius," he said. The word, apparently, carried a hint of sarcasm. She created some kind of water gadget that impressed a bunch of scientists. A few people in the audience chuckled politely. "Let's bring her out." Amara stepped onto the stage. The audience applauded warmly. She waved shyly and sat in the chair across from Richard. "So," Richard said, leaning back casually, "you invented a water filter." "Yes," Amara said softly. "For communities that don't have access to clean drinking water." Richard tilted his head. "And you're 17. Yes." He picked up a small sample of the device placed on the table. It looked simple. Plastic tubing. A small chamber filled with charcoal and natural filtration materials. "You expect people to believe this thing works?" he asked. Amara nodded calmly. "It removes over 90% of harmful bacteria and pollutants." The audience murmured with interest. But Richard smirked. "You sure Google didn't help you a little too much?" A few uncomfortable laughs floated through the room. Amara paused, then answered honestly. "I used online research, yes. But the design and testing were my own." Richard shrugged again. "Well, let's see what all the fuss is about." He reached for the trophy sitting beside him. A beautiful glass award engraved with her name. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the Young Innovator of the Year, Amara Williams." The audience applauded loudly. Amara stood, smiling nervously. Richard handed her the trophy. For a moment, it felt perfect. Her grandmother wiped tears from her eyes. But then something strange happened. Richard looked at the award closely. Huh, he said. Feels kind of cheap. Before anyone could react, he twisted the top piece jokingly. Crack. The glass snapped in his hands. The trophy split apart. A sharp gasp filled the studio. Richard burst out laughing. Well, that didn't last long. The broken pieces slipped from his hands and hit the stage floor. Silence spread across the room. Cameramen exchanged glances. Producers froze. Even the audience seemed unsure whether to react. Amara stared at the shattered award. Years of work, recognition, the proud moment she had imagined. Broken in seconds. Richard shrugged. Guess we'll get you another one. But something in his tone felt dismissive. Mocking. And millions of viewers watching from homes across America, Britain, and Canada could feel the tension through their screens. The camera slowly zoomed in on Amara's face. People expected tears, embarrassment, anger, but none of that appeared. Instead, Amara bent down quietly and picked up the broken pieces. She held them gently in her hands. Then she looked at Richard. And smiled. Not a forced smile. A calm, genuine one. The kind that confused people. I'm actually glad that happened, she said softly. Richard blinked. Glad. Amara nodded. Yes. The audience leaned forward, because something about her voice carried quiet confidence. She turned toward the crowd. My grandmother taught me something important, she said. That awards are nice, but they're not the real reason we do things. The studio grew even quieter. Richard crossed his arms, curious now. Amara placed the broken pieces of the trophy on the table. When I was 9 years old, she continued, my grandmother got very sick. Her grandmother watched from the audience, surprised. We lived in a small town where the water pipes were old and contaminated. The crowd listened carefully. She had to boil water every day just to drink it safely. Amara held up the small filtration device. That's why I built this. Her voice stayed steady. Not for a trophy. Not for television. She looked directly at Richard. But because somewhere right now, someone's grandmother is still boiling water just to stay healthy. The audience fell completely silent. Richard shifted in his chair. The mood had changed. But Amara wasn't finished. And what she did next would leave the entire studio speechless.